Welcome to That's a Hard No, the podcast about learning to say no and set boundaries to live our best lives. I'm your host, Heather Drago. You may think, because of this podcast, that I'm a boundary setting expert, but I'm not. I'm an expert at struggling to set boundaries. But you know what? I'm working on it, and it is getting easier. Follow along with me as I learn from fellow strugglers and experts so that you too can start saying no without feeling fear, guilt, or FOMO.
You don't know where to go. Unfriendly applications got you feeling low. You're not sure what to do. Weight of expectations is coming down on you. There's a phrase you should know. Tastes so much sweeter than hello. That's a hard no.
Boundaries, folks. The more important they are, the harder they are to set. I've illustrated it 1,000 different ways by this point, but setting a boundary with, let's say, a bartender who is annoyed that you want a drink he has to get from the back is no big deal. Whatever, I don't even like to drink. You are lost, pal. But when the stakes are higher, when we're talking about your health and well-being, it's more important than ever to set strong boundaries. We've all seen the stories. We've all heard from friends and family about a time when a medical provider didn't treat them well, didn't respect their intuitions, and their health suffered for it. Today's guest is a medical professional, but she's also gone through a journey of self-advocacy of her own. Rachel Malec is a 13-year nurse practitioner with experience at one of the most prestigious hospitals in the world. A former critical care nurse and educator, she founded Hope for Hydro in 2019, a nonprofit dedicated to improving the lives of those suffering from hydrocephalus by supporting research and innovation. Our conversation today covers medical self-advocacy, what to expect from your medical providers, and what boundaries we need to set around our health and healthcare. Well, hi, Rachel. Thank you so much for coming in and talking with me today.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to jump right in. So, as someone who has gotten a view from both sides of the lens, where should we set the boundary between trusting medical professionals and self-advocating or seeking more options?
I feel like that's the question that I've took years to kind of figure out. But I think if I could just summarize it in a quick answer, it would be trusting your gut. I think we're given that naturally. And there's nothing that can change why we have this feeling in our gut. If you're not getting the answers that you want, and the doctor or nurse or whoever you're working with is telling you something that doesn't sit well with you and it doesn't make sense to you, that you have to follow your gut and pursue other options, other opinions, because no one knows your body or your child's body or personality, whatever your concern is, symptoms, the way that you do.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people get hung up still, surprisingly, in white coat syndrome, where they feel they have to defer or be polite to those in a white coat or in a medical uniform, right? And so they don't speak up, and they're afraid to say something. They're afraid to be rude. They want to be polite, right? And I have found I'm often I have been on receiving advocacy, and I've been on the advocate role. And recently, someone in my family was diagnosed with cancer, and literally they kept saying, well, we could get this test for you, and maybe that would give us more definitive information. And I was like, yes. Can we please have that test? How do we schedule that test? Yeah. Like, I literally had to keep asking for it. Like, why is it like a thing? Like, sometimes you just really have to be assertive and get over the fear of being seen as rude. And I think some people are afraid if I'm rude to the doctor, then they're not going to take good care of me.
And if you have a provider that makes you feel that way, that's maybe that's a sign. Right. And maybe you want to seek someone that makes you feel more comfortable, but knowing in the back of your head that you are absolutely on the right track, that you should be able to ask whatever questions that you have. It is your life on the line, essentially, no matter what you're going through. If you don't fully investigate something or you don't feel that you're understanding your health, how are you going to live day to day? Because what a doctor, has is, a lot of time in their office, and they're seeing patients over and over again. You are a piece of their day. You or your family member is the person that has to go home and live this life every single day and take care of yourself every single day. And that's something I feel that patients even miss themselves, is that, they are telling you what to do in this 15, 20-minute session, but you're the one that has to go home every single day and live with the diagnosis.
Right.
So feel empowered.
Yeah. So let's take a step back for a minute. And how about if you share with our listeners your story and why this, you mentioned earlier, I've been thinking about that question for a number of years. Like, what started your journey in that realm?
So I first started off in the medical field as a registered nurse. I got my nurse practitioner's license, and I worked for one of the most prestigious hospitals in the world, and that's where my medical journey started. But in 2017, I became a mom, and I gave birth to what we thought was a healthy baby boy, and there was nothing in my pregnancy that was alarming. All of our scans and testing, we were told that he's a perfect baby boy. And over the next 6 months after I came home from the hospital, I noticed a change in my son. And I started to lose him, the baby that I knew, even though I was a first-time mom. He just stopped making eye contact, and he laughed for like a few weeks, and that laugh went away. And he stared a lot. And he was always like meeting his milestones ahead of schedule. Like he was always really ahead, and it started to feel like a fight. And so I went into the pediatrician's office 3 times and over like a 4-month period. And I was like, something just doesn't feel right. And the autism community does such a great job of advocacy. And this is driven from parents and providers and people who work with autistic people, and they kind of put the thought in my mind, or the red flag in my mind, that it seems like he's having a regression. And I started thinking he might have autism, and I was falsely reassured by our pediatrician that that these are normal things, that I was kind of overreacting.
No. A mom, you're with the baby all day long. You know the nuances. You see the signs.
And see, you tell me this, but like I felt so second as a new mom, even with my nursing background, I felt like they know better than me. They know better. And so I was persistent, and I kept coming back, and what wasn't recognized is that his head circumference, if you had a baby recently, they measure it every single visit. He was jumping growth curves every single time, which should have been a red flag in itself, but it never triggered anything. So I ended up seeing someone else in the practice, another pediatrician who happened to be working with a resident that day, and he put the picture together of all the things that we were dealing with, and he said, "I think your child has hydrocephalus." And I remember hearing that.
How scary.
Oh, but you know what I felt? I felt finally someone's listening to me.
Yes.
I didn't think how horrible the diagnosis was. I thought, oh
Finally,
my gosh, someone believes
something we
me.
can
Someone,
act on.
yes.
Can you tell us what hydrocephalus is? Can you define that for us?
So it's an incurable brain disease that the only treatment to manage the symptoms of hydrocephalus and the complications of hydrocephalus is brain surgery. And that children and adults that have this will live with this forever and could need multiple brain surgeries over a lifetime.
What happens in the brain when a child has this?
So the fluid is not, we all have cerebral spinal fluid in our brain, and he could not clear his, so it compressed the brain against the skull, and so causing a brain injury.
Yes.
And hydrocephalus left untreated is completely fatal. If you don't get treatment, you'll get a slow and painful death, but you'll also get brain damage. And one thing I've learned is that even in the United States, with amazing healthcare, that children that have missed signs and symptoms, have permanent blindness, learning disabilities, seizures. It's very important to catch and treat hydrocephalus.
But it is treatable.
It is treatable.
Okay.
It is treatable. So we got the hydrocephalus. So we were sent to neurosurgery. The neurosurgeon told me that she didn't think it was hydrocephalus, but she'll do a quick test for us because she thought my son was doing so well. And that's where I want to go back and say that it just, my mom gut was like, no, like something is wrong. I'm telling you, this is not my kid that I had 6 months ago. And he was 11 months old when we finally got to a neurosurgeon. And we did the simple test. I made it in my driveway, and we saw the hospital system calling on the caller ID. And I knew that was bad. You never get results that fast unless it's bad. And sure enough, the physician's assistant called and said, I can't believe it, but your son has hydrocephalus and it's severe. He said the ventricles were severely dilated, which means, and so we went from everyone telling me that everything's okay to now my son was facing a life-threatening, incurable brain disease diagnosis. And we left the conversation. He said, we have brain surgery scheduled August 21st. And the neurosurgeon's out of town for 2 weeks, so she'll tell you there's 1 or 2 surgeries. She's out of town. She'll talk to you when she gets back into office.
So you had to wait for 2 weeks?
2 weeks. And I remember in that moment, I just said, yeah, okay. And I hung up the phone. And that changed.
I'm sure you were in shock.
Oh, I was in shock. And that changed my perception as a nurse practitioner who worked in lung cancer, giving out diagnoses all the time about thinking, oh, the patient did so great. They're so strong. They're handling it. No, they're not. Like I did not understand that point of view until I got my own or my son got his diagnosis. But then,
wow.
Yeah.
2 weeks. Just hang out.
Just hang out. Nothing.
This thing is impairing your child's brain for 2 more weeks.
And he has a surgery date, and I didn't know what surgery he was having.
Yeah.
So that's what inspired the multiple second opinions that we got. So we ended up, I just sat there with so many questions that I said, okay, I've seen my patients come to me for a second opinion, and I've seen how second opinions truly change lives. And anyone who's listening to this, sometimes people feel guilty or not empowered, or I don't want to make my doctor mad.
What if my doctor finds out I went to someone else?
Yes. And if they have a problem with that, that is a red flag. Anyone who has a problem, if they're so confident in their opinion, the second opinion should just say,
confirm.
Confirm. Or it's going to give you more information to make a better decision. And we ended up seeking 3 other neurosurgical opinions, and they all gave us a different piece to the puzzle.
Oh.
And one neurosurgeon told us about this surgery called an ETV, and the other option was to have a medical device permanently implanted in my son's brain for the rest of his life. And once you have this device, it saves lives if it's great, but you can never take it out because your body becomes dependent on it. And so that first second opinion really highlighted this shuntless procedure and instilled like a excitement into us. But this neurosurgeon said that my son might not have hydrocephalus, that because he looked so well, that maybe we could give it time. Let's check it out in 3 months, and like maybe results will be different. And it was everything I wanted to hear, though. I went on this roller coaster, and I'd like to share that because I feel like I can understand when patients get bad diagnoses and they want to hold on to that hope or that faith.
Yes.
Because I did. But everything in my gut, again, going back to that first question, everything in my gut was saying, Rachel, no, you know that there's something wrong. So it drove us to a third opinion. And then that neurosurgeon said, absolutely not. He looked me in the face and he said, I don't care what your son is doing now. He is meant to do more. And that his picture of his brain is so bad that every day you wait to have this brain surgery, he's getting brain damage.
Right.
And I get chills still, but it was what I needed to hear. And I needed to hear all 3 of these doctors' opinions because they were so different. And ultimately, it led us getting surgery out of state. It was not an option offered in Ohio. And 2 of the neurosurgeons never even mentioned it to us. And I just feel like if I didn't seek this care myself, that it wouldn't have even been on the table, and it ended up being the best option for my child. one of the other things is when I had those 2 weeks to sit, I turned to Facebook and Google what the doctors in my nursing degree, they say, don't let your patients on Google.
Yep.
Don't let your patients on the internet. It ended up being the best resource for me. And that's something else I would like to kind of debunk is that it's a form of empowerment and no one knows what it's like to live with these diagnoses like a person who's living it. And again,
So did you find other parents who were struggling with the same diagnoses?
yes, I joined a Facebook group that was literally called Parents of Children with Hydrocephalus.
Okay.
And I learned in there that I need to go and get my son in therapy, in early intervention. I learned more in depth about the surgeries from parents who actually had these surgeries.
Experienced it, yeah.
Children had these surgeries. So now, as a provider, I always tell my patients to seek support in these support groups, and that yes, can be misinformation, and you got to remember that these are people without medical degrees, but you could always run by what you hear in these groups.
Yeah, I rail against Facebook and
Yeah.
social media, even though I'm a marketer. But Facebook groups are where it's at.
Yeah.
Like, there are a lot of really supportive communities on Facebook if
Yeah.
you find the right group.
Yes.
And I think you're right. You know, whatever information you get, run it by a professional.
Yes.
But I think that's great. And anytime you can talk with someone who's been through it. My grandmother had a stage 4 glioblastoma and had to go through brain surgery.
Yes.
And there are so many things that happen after brain surgery. You end up in bizarro world,
Yes.
and nobody tells you what that's like. And I really wish back in that day,
Yes.
I had other people to talk to whose family member went through the same thing, because it was shocking what we went through, and we had certain expectations that were really a little too optimistic, and because of what the medical people were telling us. And I really wish there was someone else around I could talk to that say, well, this is really what's going to happen, and these are the weird things that are going to happen when they
Right.
wake up. And yeah,
Right. And I do think that again, I keep going back to the fact that these visits that you have with your providers is that they're only limited. So there's no
Right.
way they could tell you all of
the
these
things,
things.
yeah.
But it's unfair to the patient. It's, and also, again, having that dual knowledge, like I remember recovering hydrocephalus patients as a PACU nurse, a recovery room nurse, and I would see the length. Oh, this person had 4 brain surgeries for hydrocephalus, or 5, or whatever it may have been. But I see them doing well in the moment. Like my piece of the puzzle went well, and they kind of go off to the floor and they get discharged to their home. I could never think about the full picture. Like when you went home with your grandma, what life looked like, how different life would look after each brain surgery, each
Right.
recovery. It's, going back to the fact that no one knows what it's like unless you've been through it.
Yeah. How's your son doing now?
My son is doing amazing. Hydrocephalus is scary because we don't know how long his surgery will last for. And doing a new kind of surgery, it's only been in the United States for about 15 years now. And when he had it, that was only about 10 years. But right now, it's the best possible choice we could have made for him. And he's thriving.
Oh,
He's
that's wonderful.
thriving. He's in a peer typical class. He does so many sports, which is something I learned through the hydrocephalus community is don't put this label, do not put this fake glass ceiling that's there that
Yes,
my
yes.
son had brain surgery, my son has a brain condition. There's something called neuroplasticity, and it's very
Yes.
interesting. And
We've talked about it here on the
Oh,
podcast a number of times.
it's amazing.
It is amazing.
And it's, again, removing those glass ceilings that says you can't. You got to have that I can attitude. And we were told he might never walk or talk. They said because his brain picture was so terrible. And then if I would have got hung up on that and said, oh, he can't do this, or let's not push therapy, let's not put him in peer gymnastics or whatever, everything's safe and ran through our doctors. But if I would have listened to that, I wouldn't get to see the child he could be. And
Right.
he gets to show me that.
Wow, that's
Yeah.
amazing. And just to back up, neuroplasticity
Yes.
is the ability we have to rewire our brains and make new neuro connections
Yes.
by doing new things, by learning new things, by trying things. And so when we talk about learning how to say no and rewiring our brain to feel okay about setting boundaries, that's part of that same process, that practice every day.
Yes.
that learning is building new neural networks.
Yes.
Right, which is amazing that our
Yes.
brains can do that.
It's absolutely amazing. And it's also a fairly new, studied, proven thing. Before, we used to think the brain is injured and there's nothing we can do
You're
about
going
it.
to be damaged forever.
Yes.
And
Yep. Or you're set in your ways, your habits. Like you said, how many times have you heard you can't teach an old dog new tricks? But you can't. You really can. You really,
Yeah.
really, truly can.
Yeah.
So
When we talked about advocating and listening to our guts, when you went around to these different professionals, different providers, how did you know when you could trust the care team? Like, you got, someone not believing you, and then someone saying, well, this is how it's going to be, and then you went to the third person. Like, how do you know when you can trust a medical provider?
it's something I continue to struggle with, to be honest. But I think the biggest piece is if you feel they are truly listening to you and looking at you as holistically as possible. Because if you just focus in on one thing, just treating the one piece and not looking at the person as a whole or with their whole complaints, their concerns, something big might get missed. That probably sounds a little strange, but I feel like I took all of those opinions and that gave me experience, and seeing which doctor, like the last doctor I told you about, that looked me in the face and says, I do not care what your son looks like or what he's doing. Look at these pictures. He was meant to do more. And he was so truly
He was
right.
looking at him as a human being,
Yes.
not just a medical case.
Yes, and not just that, oh, look, how, he just told me that Roman might be low normal for him, but that's not who he is supposed to be. Like, he could see my son for who he was individually and not just comparing him to the average milestone, if that's making sense.
Yes.
And that clicked with my gut, right? Because I kept saying, like, but
he's advocating for my child.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And his assessment is matching my gut, saying, this isn't my son. Like, I get that he continued to meet milestones, but it wasn't at the rate. Remember back talking about just that something wasn't sitting right in my gut. And this provider matched what I was feeling or had an explanation for what we were going through. And it wasn't what I wanted to hear. We were back on the fight of a lifetime, but it was what I needed to hear. The other thing I will say is, especially for someone who's not in medicine, having a great primary care is such an essential piece.
Oh, absolutely.
They're the ones you can run everything by. They're the ones who are going to know
Yes.
you at your baseline, see you in
Yes.
those well visits.
Yes.
It's so huge. If you don't like your primary care, or you don't match with what their vibe of medicine is, there are so many wonderful primary care
Absolutely.
providers out there that you can find.
I will
Okay.
second that. I recently went through a cancer diagnosis
Yeah.
and cancer treatment,
Yeah.
and I love my primary care doctor. And even though I had this amazing cancer specialist team of specialists, I made sure that they were talking to her, and I would go to her and say, "This is what's happening, and can you help me with this?" And she was quarterbacking the
Yes.
entire team, and I think that's essential. Everyone needs to be talking to each other instead of working in silos.
Yes, yes. And they if something isn't right, if you're like, my specialist, I'm kind of disagreeing with, or I don't feel like this, they're
Is there
doing the right
someone
thing.
else you recommend I talk to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Or do you agree? Do I need check? Am I feeling, are my feelings out of boundary? Because one thing I struggle with is now medical anxiety. I never thought that I would have that as a nurse, and I worked in ICUs. But once the trust is broken, sometimes I feel like I could get a little out of, maybe even like a little out of line, where I need my primary care to be like, Rachel, this is normal, or for my son, you know what, this is normal, or these are the steps that we will take. It's not always the worst scenario. So,
Right.
but the primary care person can really help me with that, or,
Absolutely.
help anyone.
Absolutely. So this is a great place to take a break. We're going to take a break, and we'll be back with Rachel in just a few minutes. That's a Hard No is brought to you by Clever Girl Marketing, my full-service agency specializing in smart, strategic marketing solutions for businesses and nonprofits. Okay, so you're probably wondering, Heather, what's with the podcast about boundaries? Why not marketing? Well, maybe in the future, but for now, it actually does relate, so bear with me here. Smart marketing, strategic marketing, requires knowing what to say no to and why. Businesses and nonprofits get inundated with marketing options and offers every day. We help you cut through all that noise, focus on your specific needs, and develop actionable strategies that are doable and actually make sense. Whether it's websites, SEO, email, social, or traditional channels, we're experienced in all of it. So if you need help figuring out your marketing, visit our website, clevergrowmarketing.com, and get in touch. Welcome back. I loved this conversation with Rachel. Her first-person account of advocating for her son is such an important example of doing what you know is right, even if taking up space makes you feel uncomfortable. I share a little bit more about my cancer story, we talk more about Rachel's foundation, and mostly we talk about how to have healthy expectations for your medical providers. Okay, so we're back with Rachel. So, Rachel, when we're talking about advocating for ourselves and our loved ones, what expectations are fair to set? What boundaries can we set? What should we expect from our medical providers? And when can we and shouldn't we say no?
Mm-hmm. So I think that first and foremost, you mentioned that the primary care doctor was your quarterback, right?
Yes.
So you got to remember you're like the owner of the team. This is your body.
Oh, I like that.
Yes.
Nice
And
analogy.
so yes, you are top tier in this team. So you have the ability to say no whenever you want to, but that could be also dangerous. So you, like, again, going back to checking yourself, you want to make sure that you're educated and why are you saying no? But if you have a good reason, don't ever be afraid to. And that's where the second opinion, I feel like, comes into place, because if you have two people telling you the same answer, it might be time to reevaluate, why are you saying no?
Mm-hmm.
But the second opinion might also give you some more education. I think something that we can expect from providers is to listen to you. If they don't, they could have every knowledge memorized from a book and had the highest titles and prestige from their schools, but if they can't apply it, it's going to be worthless. It's like going to someone with no experience because they can't apply that to you. So I think that they should have to be a good listener. I think that you also need to make sure they're experienced. And that's something I don't think a lot of people realize.
You can ask that.
You can ask
how many
that.
of these surgeries have you done?
Correct.
Yeah.
How many do you do a year?
Mm-hmm.
How often do you see this patient? What's your specialty? In medicine, we see a big trend of subspecialty. Before, you would have a primary care doctor and you'd have maybe like a cardiologist or a thoracic surgeon. Now we have some people that are subspecializing just in the little veins in the heart or in the arteries in the heart. We have people that see lungs, but then we have general pulmonology, we call it. And they used to see every lung disease under the sun. Now we have pulmonologists that just see lung cancer, just do emphysema and COPD. Some just do asthma. It's so subspecialty. Mm-hmm. And I would recommend trying to find the doctor, the specialist that sees your subspecialty.
Right.
And with surgeons, this is more important than anything, in my opinion. Surgeons aren't always known for the bedside manner.
Yes, that's true.
But you don't need them to. You don't need them to give you a hug after surgery. I always tell my patients this. I said some patients would have mixed reviews on a surgeon I really like. I'm like, listen, you can see a nurse practitioner for this, or you can see your primary care for this. You need them to do the surgery really well. And so you want to know how many and is this their specialty?
And it's okay to ask.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You can ask anything. And that could also help gauge, how we talked about how do we know when we feel like, how do we know when to say no, or what gives us that strength? Asking questions. And you can see are they clicking with not just your personality, but what is your goal in your medical care, Yeah. And another expectation, follow through, someone that's not going to just dump you once you're done until you're ready, I want to say, there is a little bit of a recovery time, even with a surgery. Again, my son had brain surgery. his neurosurgeon followed him to make sure everything was good with his brain surgery for 2 years. This was our intense follow-up where we were going regularly for MRIs. It wasn't my expectation that he would see my son through his therapies because that's nothing to do with the surgery.
Right.
Although there might have been a complication from the surgery or a side effect, unfortunately, of brain surgery to lose some physical or mental capabilities. That's not his job to recover it. That's the therapist. So maybe throwing something on us as the patient is knowing who does what on your team.
Yeah.
You know, that could be something, but asking is how you're going to find that out.
Yeah. I would say the other thing in my experience is when you are given, and it sounds to me like you were kind of in the same situation, when you're given a really serious diagnosis and action has to be made, it's like for a minute time stops and everything slows down. And then it speeds up really fast. And they're like, you got to sign this document and we got to get your surgery scheduled. And it's a little crazy and overwhelming.
Yes.
And I feel like sometimes people get rushed into things, and it's okay to say, I'm not ready to schedule this right now. Like I remember them getting phone calls saying, we got to schedule this thing. And I'm like, wait.
Yeah.
Like, can I take a breath for a minute? Can I, and I think it's okay to, like, if you need things re-explained to you, if you need to slow down, if you're not ready to schedule something and you need to put it out another week. Another appointment to clarify. Yeah, it's okay to not ride the wave that they throw at you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. And I say that with caution, though, because sometimes
it's an emergency.
Right.
But
sometimes it's with an emergency, or sometimes even with a cancer diagnosis, they want to make sure we get it as early as possible. So I say within reason.
Yeah.
But like you said, is a week or a day gonna,
right,
maybe like when I hung up that call, I related to, I said yes. And I literally hung up. All I said was, yes, okay, thank you. And I had a brain surgery on the table for my son, and I just said yes to it. But in the back of my head, that was my start of my action, and yes, we had the surgery date in case something went crazy in between now and then. But it did give me, thankfully, with the neurosurgeon being out of town.
Yes, it gave you a minute.
It gave me a minute.
Yeah.
Because what if they called and said she could do it tomorrow? I don't know. Like you said, you kind of feel rushed and pressured. But getting more information is never a bad thing at all.
Yeah.
And saying I need more help or I need more time is not bad either.
Right. So when a patient or advocate feels like there is a major mishandling of care, not malpractice necessarily, but unprofessional behavior or something similar, what can they do? So
there's two things that you can do. My first thing would be to think about firing your provider. Even if they take the repercussions that might come to them, why would you want to go back to someone that has wronged you? Because it's probably not just a one-time thing, or could it happen again? But what someone could do that wants to make sure that the appropriate chain of command is followed is there's something called an ombudsman that works in the hospital systems. You can find their phone number in most websites, and you can call them, and that is their job, is to handle mishandlings, and they can kind of decide which way to take this. There's also chairmans. So chairmans are people who run departments in hospital systems, and technically all physicians and providers report to them. So you could talk to them, and that you could send an email.
You can ask for the chairman of that department.
For the chairman, leave them a voicemail. Depends on what happens, but at least they know that it's documented and reported. And I feel like that is important. You don't want to do these things if it's just things that are small, but if it is something major, I think that it's worth noting. So if it's a trend, that the right things can be handled.
I know in my case, I had two instances where my amazing cancer team sent me to go talk to someone. One was a plastic surgeon in case I needed a mastectomy. And the guy he was so insensitive, and I was so kind of in shock still. And he was just showing me these pictures of results of surgeries, and he was very blasé about it. And I was looking at these pictures and thinking these people looked mutilated.
Yeah.
And he was like, "This is a great outcome." And and he was really insensitive about it. And I left there really shaken. And the next time I met with my surgeon, I was like, "Do not send people to this guy. This is what happened. It was a really terrible experience, and it totally threw me. It kind of ruined my thought process about what I want to do." And then another instance, I had a bad reaction to the oral chemo I had to take, and so they sent me to a rheumatologist, who again was just like really rude and kind of threw up her hands, like, "I don't know why they send these people to me," like right in front of me.
And like it's your fault, right?
And I was
you're
like, "Wait a minute, back up. Are you saying you don't want to help me? Because I'm done here."
and you're paying your copay too,
right?
Like,
And
you know,
I just was like, "Wow, that was really rude." And I basically said, "Fine, we're done here," and I kind of left.
Yeah.
And then I again said something to my surgeon, and she called me.
Oh, okay.
And she was like, "Well, I'm sorry if there was a miscommunication." I was like, "There was no miscommunication. You were just rude and unprofessional."
Yeah.
Like, I told her off. And I don't think she was used to that.
Yeah.
So I probably should have reported it higher up the chain, but I at least wanted my doctor to know what my experience was like, so they weren't referring more people that were in my shoes later on.
Right. But when you go up higher, there's classes that they can send people to.
Ah, okay.
They might be great doctors or great surgeons,
But just not
not people, or to be like, hey, like, but I think it's another way you're advocating for not only yourself but other patients.
Yeah.
Because giving someone like that an inside perspective, like, listen, I'm dealing with this horrible diagnosis that I have to live with. You get to go home and clock out from your life.
I'm looking for
this
help. I
life.
don't need your exasperation. Keep it to yourself.
Exactly. Right. And just how they might not even think how that could affect you, or how, I don't know, I've been on down and out when you're dealing with this. Your level of stress is high, but I also got very emotional. Like, I would be in shopping,
absolutely.
and I would see something that would trigger, maybe just a nice little healthy baby
boy,
that's not in my shoes, and it would I was always on edge. So when you go into the doctor's office, it escalates. You need someone. They need to understand what we are going through, as patients.
Absolutely.
And they might not be able to be the bubbliest person, but
empathy.
Empathy
is something I require.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
And partnership. Understanding that this is a partnership. It isn't just a parent-child relationship almost, this isn't your boss. This is a partner in your health. So I think that saying something higher up is sometimes more helpful, because
Well, good to know.
Yeah.
I'll lock that away for next time. So let's flip this a little bit. Let's talk about your other side of things as a medical professional. What boundaries do medical professionals have that patients could benefit from understanding?
That we're humans too. So the other thing is that we are not superhumans, and that we have things that go on in our own personal lives that we have to put aside for work. You have to show up every day. When I was going through my son's diagnosis, I had to show up every day, and I wasn't working every day at this time, but every time that I worked, I had to show up and put everything that I was going aside. And it's just what you do as a medical provider. Your son, your child might be having their dance recital, and that surgeon might have to be in an OR case. Medical providers give up a lot to serve others. So that's something, but also that we do see other patients throughout the day, and the schedule is tight. And when it's your time, you should expect that I give you my time. But also, if a provider isn't calling you back right away, it's probably because they're already slotted off seeing another patient. And that's something that I think we could, again, going back to that partnership, and try to get on the same page, that we can work together to understand each other's day a little bit better. That as much as I would love to call you and ease your worries right away, I still have a full schedule of patients. And that, so there's a big thing with my chart messaging and calling. You try to be respectful. Maybe not every single question that you have, maybe get a list and send it with a list of questions
Yeah.
instead of
10
da-da-da-da-da-da.
emails.
Yeah,
Yeah,
10
yeah,
emails
yeah,
because
yeah.
it just jams up the box. So we're only human too.
Yeah. Again, I think it's one of those, it boils down to empathy, and you never know what someone else is going through at any given time.
Right.
So maybe that particular doctor that I went to that was so exasperated, maybe
be.
she was having a really bad day,
Right.
and maybe that was just a one-off.
Yeah.
But still,
And the
I
one
didn't like it.
No, and that's you're right.
Yeah.
You guys can both collaborate on. You're both going through something.
Yeah.
Patients and providers shouldn't be pitted against each other either.
Yeah.
And I will say one other thing is that the healthcare system has been so inundated for a long time, but then we throw COVID in there.
Yeah.
And how we stopped seeing patients for months on end, so then you get more backed up, and
Yeah.
what a wrench that had.
And a lot of people left the field,
Yes, a lot of people left, because
especially
they were,
nurses.
yes,
Yeah.
especially nurses. It's the healthcare system, and this is nothing against. There are wonderful people that I said are dedicating their lives, choosing to serve others over their own families. That is something amazing, but the healthcare system as a whole in the United States, I feel like, is extremely, extremely overwhelmed. And
Yeah.
you might not know the expectation of how many patients or what productivity looks like in a
And how strained
in a doctor's day
provider
or
might
nurse's
be.
day.
Yeah.
That's a lot to keep up with.
Yeah. So when we're feeling frustrated or impatient, what limitations do medical providers have that we should know about to help us have that empathy?
Scheduling is a big one.
Right.
I mean, it's so disconnected. These days, I feel like, because it's inundated, there's so many people. Like for a test, I would order a test for one of my patients, and I would want results as fast as I could have, just as the provider. So I could only imagine what a patient feels like, but the testing is completely booked out. And what I could do as a provider is advocate to my administration, saying I feel that a 2-week wait for a cancer patient or a patient with that needing brain imaging, I feel like that is like unacceptable. But at the end of the day, I have no control over the schedule. I wouldn't even have control over my own schedule. A lot of providers do not have control over their own schedules.
Oh, really?
Yes. So the patients book out rather far in advance. And unless I'm literally going to come in on a day off or stay late for no compensation, and there's no true benefit to me to add another patient on, work through a lunch, my administrative time, I cannot boot someone off my schedule. Like, that comes from administration.
Yeah.
It's everybody has a boss. So there are quite a few things that medical providers can't overrun. We can advocate, and that's what you could ask them to do, or ask, who can I talk to advocate for myself as a patient? There might be someone that you can talk to. So
What about in terms of communication? What are things medical providers can say and can't say?
So nursing, so when you're in the hospital, one of the big things, nurses, RNs, or someone who's maybe doing like a cardiac echo tech or a vascular tech, imaging tech, we'll call them, in all the different imagings, we can never give you a diagnosis.
Right.
And you have to wait for a nurse practitioner, a physician assistant, or a doctor, or a medical doctor, to get, because they're called, the provider, they're allowed to give you results. So that's something I struggle with, because I'm like, I know you could see it in your chart. I know I know it's right there, even lab results sometimes. So that's something with communication. It's just a legality. And then how fast communication can occur. Like I said, I hate it as a provider when I order a test where someone's anxiously waiting results and I have to wait until my day is done, or I could sneak it in to give them a call and then we're playing phone tag. That's rough. And that's just something I feel like where sometimes my chart can be patient electronic chart. My chart seems to be taking over the world. But where you could say, hey, I'm really anxious. Can you just put it in my chart? But some people would rather have a call. But that's where I like to utilize my chart, where I could type this message essentially like a text, and the patient could read it whenever they can, and where we're not playing phone tag. But then some people would say, hey, I would rather have a phone call conversation so I can ask these questions. But it's just a workaround, setting the expectation where It's not going to be a conversation, but if you really need to know those results, I could release them to your My Chart with a note explaining it, freeing up some time.
Yeah.
But
So I want to talk about Hope for Hydro.
Yes.
But first, just any last bits of advice or encouragement or thoughts for parents or anyone really about advocating for their loved one or themselves when they need medical care.
Never be ashamed of it. Never feel that the medical team's feelings are more important than your own or your own advocacy. I can assure you that if it is a good provider, a competent provider, they're going to look up to you for your advocacy, and they are going to think that you're doing a great job. No one's going to ever hold that against you, and if they do, that's how you know you're with a wrong team.
Yes.
So, and just know that no one will ever fight for you the way, even the best. I felt like I was an excellent nurse practitioner. I went through some family things that got me into nursing, and I always felt like I put patients first, but there was no way I could ever advocate for a person the way they could because of my day, because I'm advocating for 10 people a day or 20 people a day. So just make sure that you know that you are your best advocate and live by that.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yes.
So tell us about Hope for Hydro and what you're doing and how you're advocating for people, writ large.
Yes. So I established Hope for Hydro a year after my son's diagnosis when I found out yet another gap in the healthcare system is that although hydrocephalus is as common as Down syndrome at birth rate and can be acquired over a lifetime, there's a type of hydrocephalus that affects older adults. And then also after traumatic brain injuries or strokes, you can get hydrocephalus. So it's not rare. There is so limited funds for hydrocephalus research.
Really?
Yes. We receive less than Down syndrome, which is, I don't want to take anything from the Down syndrome community, but it's just like when you look at incidence rates and how it impacts the healthcare system, how expensive it is to treat and manage, research is so badly needed. And research is what gives change. So, with cancer research is so important because we are limited by treatment and we're limited by what we don't know. So I am very passionate about hydrocephalus research, and I founded Hope for Hydro to raise funds for hydrocephalus research. And we donate a grant to as many providers or many medical researchers or neurosurgeons that are looking to improve the lives of hydrocephalus sufferers or find better treatments as we can. We raise different amount of funding each year, and we have been pretty successful for just our little organization that's ran by like 6 people and
amazing,
and all that have full-time jobs and just donate their time. And we've really partnered with some amazing hospitals, and even some of our research funds have reach international territories. So that's exciting.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
So how can people donate? What are your fundraisers? Like, how are you raising the money?
So we have a website. We always accept donations through there, but we also host events in Cleveland about once a year. We've been doing a holiday brunch, family friendly, but our big fundraiser is, we call it the Cleveland Derby, Hats for Hope. And it's adults only. We get dressed up and we get corporate sponsors, and then we also take donations for raffles and ticket funding. A portion of it goes to the research pool. And something else I want to throw out is anything that is raised is always donated 100% to research. My husband and I fund the extras, we call it, like what it is to run the organization, the marketing, things like that. So everything, when someone shows up to our event, 100% of funds always go to research because I want our donors to know that they're truly making an impact.
That's amazing. Well, I just love what you're doing to advocate for others and to help in this cause.
Thank
and
you.
I love everything you said today, and it was really, really insightful and helpful. It's nice to get the two perspectives of having gone through it as a mom, but then also to hear from your point of view as a professional. So I really appreciate your time and your insights and, coming in and talking with us
today. And thank you for giving me a platform, because I hope even this reaches some providers that might have not had this experience. I think there's something for both sides of us to learn. So thank you.
Absolutely. That's a Hard No is a production of Clever Girl Marketing, my little agency in Cleveland, in partnership with our friends at Evergreen Podcasts. Many thanks to our amazing team, including Maura Del Rosario, our production and marketing coordinator, Noah Fouts, our amazing producer, editor, and composer who wrote our theme music and performed it with his band, The Big Leagues, and our new video producer and editor, Kay Holmberg. You can find show notes and resources on our website, and you can find other fun stuff on our socials. We're Hard No Podcast. Find your no, then say it with me.